Joining us today is Jackie Karsh, a 6-time Emmy-nominated multimedia journalist who has been a powerful voice for truth and activism in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks. Jackie has used her platform to moderate critical conversations about the war, educate others, and really the most important thing I have seen you do is identify the bias that we're seeing today and really speak up and help others understand what's happening. You're a rock star, Jackie. I really feel so honored to have you here. I can count on my finger how many journalists have been standing up for the truth since October 7th, and you're one of them, and we thank you so much for the powerful work you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and you're doing amazing work with this podcast, so really appreciate it being here, and it's also kind of funny being in this side of things, so we'll see how this roller coaster goes.
Well, there's so much to talk to you about. I want to know personally what has happened to your career, to you personally, since you've decided to really use your voice to stand up for the truth since October 7th, because it's not a popular view to take.
Yeah. I've been a journalist in Los Angeles for over a decade, and I have covered incredible things, right? My main beat is homelessness. I've covered infrastructure development, harm reduction, amazing things. And so I would have identified myself as a journalist who happened to be Jewish. And then October 7th happens, and everything kind of changed for me because I knew this was going to be a war of information the second it happened. And just with the rise of and influence of social media and how things were shifting in the mainstream media, I just knew that this was going to be really ugly. And honestly, I couldn't have predicted it was going to be as ugly as it is. But there's this great tweet from Aviva Campus, and I talk about this all the time. Aviva tweeted right after October 7th, I think before Israel went into Gaza. She said, "The IDF is going to defeat our enemies by land, by air, by sea, and the rest of us are going to go to battlegrounds on every other front." So this is my front, right? Journalism is my front. And I am doing what I can. And I said that I was a journalist who was Jewish. After October 7th, I'm a Jewish journalist. And I got this star on a mission to Israel in January, and I haven't taken it off since, and I've since added to my Jewish jewelry. But I think that the world sees me as a Jew. And it took me a moment to realize that I needed to do my part or use my platform, use my voice as a journalist to show what Jews are all about. Because it's 2024. You don't get to write things that are false about Jews anymore and get away with it. And that's kind of really where I am at this point.
Oh, you're so spectacular. I mean, you went to Columbia undergrad, you went to journalism school at Columbia, and we kind of have been watching The Spectator and the newspapers there and the lies and the demonization of the Jewish community at the school. And you just recently published a piece in the Jewish Journal that came out this morning, and it's called Editorial Bias: Campus Newspapers Must Stop Marginalizing Jews. And we know this is the truth, and something that people are not covering. They're talking about the chaos on campuses, but not about the newspapers. Could you touch on what you wrote about and why you wrote this article?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that this has really been overlooked, and most people are not paying attention to what is happening at college newspapers. And it's not all of them, so I don't want to throw everyone under the bus, but a lot of our elite universities have newspapers, and they inform the campus of what's happening on campus, but also how students who don't really know what's happening on campus or have thoughts about what's happening on campus, how they should think or what they should focus on. And there's been this normalization of what is really advocacy masquerading as journalism. And you could say, okay, but they're kids. They're not. They're actually adults. But these are students who are going to matriculate in some of our esteemed newsrooms. And we've seen this. We've seen them carry their advocacy into these newsrooms. And you could say, oh, but who cares? No one watches the news anymore. There's a legitimization that happens when you put a masthead above something. Okay, so you watch a TikTok video, Nobody is writing government policy based on a TikTok video. But you read an investigative piece that's produced by the New York Times, I'm going to bet you that some congressperson is going to quote that and is going to write policy based on it. And so that's the problem. It's a feeder to all of these mainstream news outlets that they're carrying that bias with them into these spaces. I think the other problem is that most students on campus don't actually, in my opinion, for what it's worth, have an opinion on everything that's going on. Or maybe they're not super informed with what's happening in Gaza or Lebanon or Syria or anything in the Middle East. Maybe that's not their focus. Maybe they love fashion. Maybe they love econ. I mean, there's so many things that they could focus on. Maybe they just love partying. But what's happening is that these newspapers are shining a spotlight, just like the fact that there's this intense media focus on Israel and not any other conflict in the world. The same thing is happening at these student newspapers. There's this intense focus on this conflict or what's happening with encampments or what's happening with student protests. And so it's a legitimization of radical student behavior by these newspapers. And it's the same concept. You slap a masthead above something, it legitimizes it.
I mean, you're absolutely right. So how do we have these universities hold these newspapers accountable? I mean, shouldn't there be a code of ethics? Like when we learn journalism, there's a code of ethics on what can and cannot be printed?
I wish I had an answer for you, but I actually don't, because I think that this is something that has evolved so rapidly in the social media age that I am a big believer in the freedom of the press and the First Amendment. But the problem is this is an abuse of that. And what is happening is news is being distorted where it's not actually news and journalism. And can you teach people? Yes, but it's not going to come from a top-down level. It's not going to come from a university mandate saying the news has to be reported a certain way. That's just not, it's not how it should be. It's got to be a situation where you have other students coming in to these newsrooms and normalizing the situation, holding others accountable. There is a strength in numbers, and we have to revert back to the mean of legitimate news. And I think that goes for almost everything. Obviously, my focus is really how Jews are being portrayed in the media, as well as Israel. But I think just generally, we have to get back to facts. We have to get back to the world where you can have an opinion on something, but you have to put it aside when you're a journalist. That's one hat you got to take off. Right. And I think that is just something that's not happening at these student newspapers. And ultimately, it's not happening in mainstream news either.
No, it's not. And the media has a huge responsibility, and they're not doing their job. And so if they're not doing their job, people like you have stood up and said, okay, let's look at this and let's find out where the bias is, and let's find out how we can really find the truth in journalism when we're looking at the news. Can you hit on that a little bit, Jackie? You've spent a lot of time since October 7th trying to educate the public and advocating for finding media bias. What advice do you have for people out there who are looking at the news and reading the news?
You know, really popular right now is the movie Wicked. And I think about this all the time because people forget that the wizard had no power. He's just a regular person, right? The same thing with journalists, to be honest, right? It looks like these are, big figures of sorts, but the truth is the journalists are just like me and are regular people. They make mistakes, they have opinions. The difference is they have this incredible reach and a power in the pen. And so articles can be read or videos can be seen by millions, potentially billions of people, depending on which outlet you're at. And I think we can't change who journalists are right now. I know that there's a lot we can talk about how to do it, but I don't think there's one specific answer. But we can change how we ourselves are consuming the news. And I think I always live by the principle of question, question, question. Question the source. Where are you getting this news from? Who's writing this article? What have they written before? Question who's being interviewed. Is this someone that even has a last name? Is it a masked figure that you really can't even identify? Does this person have a history? I think those are the first basic questions that I always go to. And the other thing that is really important to question is, what is the goal here? Is there a goal in this article? Is there subtle language that's trying to convince you of a certain narrative? Are they quoting Hamas and legitimizing, different propaganda? Or are they questioning IDF figures? I think when you start to apply a certain lens and look at things under a microscope, and it's unfortunate because it takes a little bit more time, which not a lot of people have to do when it comes to the news. And that's why people are really engaged with social media, because it's almost as if influencers tell you what to think and you don't have to do anything yourself. But if you really want to be truly informed, you have to do a little bit of research now, and you have to do some investigative work. I don't think you should do it for everything, right? But there are certain pieces that you should really unpack about what happens. And at the same time, there are an endless number of stories that can be told about every subject. And understand that when someone is shining a spotlight on one subject, they're also not shining a spotlight on something else. And it's almost as important to think about the stories that are not told as the stories that are told.
I love that. Just before we started talking on air, you told me how, wonderful it is because you get to cover these stories that really bring joy, right? Rather than covering the 1% that's always inducing fear into our community, you highlight the beauty. And you've had the chance to work with hostage families, and that is painful. But there's also so much beauty in that. I mean, I can't even imagine. Maybe that's one of the most powerful things you've done in your career as a journalist. I'm not sure. You can tell us.
Yeah, I for the last 4 years, I've done media training. Not everybody is comfortable in front of the camera, Shireen. So I've worked with CEOs, entrepreneurs, politicians even, but nothing really prepared me for helping hostage families after October 7th kind of secure media, because you forget that it was actually really hard to get international media to put these families who had their family members taken into Gaza as hostages by a terrorist organization. It was hard to get their stories told on camera. It was hard to get international media to care about these people. And they knew they had one shot, right? You get a booking on CNN, you get an interview with NBC4, you get one shot to make your plea to the world, help me. I need your help. And it was the hardest thing that I have ever had to do, honestly. And I had to separate myself. I had to put the journalist hat, because when you're hearing these stories, you have to separate the emotion, because you have to be able to say you do have one shot and we're going to make this the best shot. Unfortunately, the families that I worked with, all of their family members are still hostages. And I'll tell just one example. Eitan Gonen is Romy Gonen's dad, and I spent a lot of time trying to secure him media to tell Romy's story. Romy is a sweet girl, I think she was in her 20s, who was just dancing at the Nova Festival. She was shot, and her mother stayed on the phone with her as she was kidnapped into Gaza. What kills me is that on the anniversary of October 7th, I saw Romy Gonen's dad again. Mind you, we had never met in person. We had only spoken over the phone and WhatsApp and Zoom. And so much had changed, and yet so little had changed. And it really just drove home for me how challenging this period has been for us as a Jewish community, but for humanity, to not realize that there are humans, actual people who are languishing in tunnels, underground, being held by a terrorist regime. And nobody is standing up for them. Nobody even wants to give them 1 minute and 40 seconds on air. And that kills me. It kills me as a mom. It kills me as a person. And it kills me as a Jew.
But Jackie, why do you think that is? Why is it? I mean, it's a humanitarian issue. It's not a political issue when you have hostages. Why is it that it's so hard for them to get airtime?
I don't have a good answer there. I don't know why this isn't top of mind for everyone, for every politician. You know, when reporters are taken by Russia, we are keeping them top of mind, and it's only top of mind to us Jews, which is just crazy because there are Americans being held hostage, and you don't see enough Americans standing up.
No, and that's a job of the media, though. It's a job of the media to make this an important story. Otherwise, people forget, like everything, right? We forget unless it's top of mind. It breaks my heart, and I wish I understood why, and I don't, which is why I say you're one of the few journalists who's really stood up since October 7th to speak up. Jackie, you've seen so much pain and so much hardship in the past year. Do you still have hope?
I do, because we've been through worse. I do believe we've been through worse. We are a resilient people. It's one of the things that truly is remarkable about the Jewish people. We have been through so much persecution, so much. And yet, with every generation, we rise up again. We are the phoenix from the ashes. And I'll tell you a fun little story. I like to look at old text. It's just something I enjoy. And there was a Bible that was up for auction by Sotheby's. And I was just reading the text that from the picture. And I understood it because I went to Jewish day school, so I can still read the biblical Hebrew language. And it just hit so close to home. It was a description of some sort of persecution we were enduring back then too. And we've been through so much. We will get through this. It's going to be tough. We all need to get up. We all need to be and do what Aviva Klampus says. We all need to stand up and fight on our individual battlegrounds, on our fronts. But at the end of the day, the Jewish value of life, Am Yisrael Chai, there's a reason why we say that phrase over and over again. We don't live in a world of death. We live in a world of life, and we celebrate life every time we can.
Beautiful, Jackie. You really are. You're brilliant. You are making us all hopeful for standing up, for speaking up. I'm going to have you on again because I think you're going to have some great news and some beautiful things to share with us in the future. And I thank you for coming in as a busy mom of three, as a journalist and an activist. Thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun being on this side of the chair.
You were great on this side. That's why I say you're coming back again. You were fantastic.
I normally don't chat so much. So
I love it.
You got me talking.
I love it. I love it. I love it. We're going to put you back in the hot seat again soon. We're so happy to have you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. You saw it right here on Moms Matter, and we'll see you next time.